Hey, welcome back everyone. Today we got a fun one. We're talking about optimizing our diet for spiritual development. Now, there are many people today who are waking up to the importance of diet and the foods that we put in our body. But it's also led to what seems like a never-ending internet debate of influencers and so-called experts. What's the native human diet? Plant-based, animal-based, vegan, carnivore, low carb or low fat. And in my opinion, a lot of this argument really boils down to priorities. What level of health do we want to attain? Are we in it for the physical gains and the physique, or are we in it for the spiritual evolution and the soul development? And for me, at this point in time, I'm very much interested in the spiritual side of this journey that we're all on. But I also want a healthy balance. I want to remain physically active. I want to be able to train and perform at a high level, but really to use this physical existence to move towards the experience of who I really am as a soul, to reach these higher states of consciousness, of love and oneness and unity. So when I'm considering the optimal spiritual diet, in my mind, what better place to look than the great avatars, the teachers, the spiritual masters who have graced our planet? Who could have known better than these people? And so let's take it back to start all the way to ancient times, ancient Greece to be exact. And Plutarch, the ancient Greek historian, tells us that the ancient Greeks before the time of Lycurgus ate nothing but fruit. And according to Onomacritus, an Athenian compiler of oracles and stories, he said that each generation reached the age of 200 years. And this is interesting because this isn't unique to the Greek culture. We see this cross-culturally. And we look at the Bible, these biblical patriarchs who are said to have lived for hundreds of years. We look at the Sumerian and the Egyptian kings lists, and the kings it was said they lived for thousands of years. And I truly believe this was the original human blueprint, that this is how we were designed to live, and that more than anything, we have degenerated over time to the point we're at today, where so many people can hardly make it to 40 before they start to decline with chronic pain and health problems. And it's very, very sad, I think. But I also think that if we start to live in harmony with the planet, with one another, with God, source, whatever you want to call it, that we can return to this state, that health and longevity and fulfillment can be available to us again. And so we can look also to some of the great thinkers and initiates who have lived throughout history. Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher and mathematician, he was strongly against the consumption of meat. He did not eat it. He didn't allow his students to eat it in his mystery schools. Leonardo da Vinci, the great polymath of his time, we have letters that indicate he was a strict vegetarian as well. And there was the legendary and very mysterious Saint Germain, who was rumored to live for many centuries without aging. And we're told that he lived on a meatless diet of oats and other plant foods. And so it seems like many of these great philosophers, initiates, spiritual masters all knew that if you want to attain these higher transcendent states of consciousness, or spiritual realization, to evolve beyond this bodily form, that it's important to avoid meat because meat lowers our vibration considerably. No matter where you look, the Greeks, the Ayurvedic traditions, they all believe that when we consume dead animals, we essentially take on or absorb the energy of that animal into our own energy field and body. And so all the fear, the pain, the suffering that animal endured, especially today with conventionally raised meat products, the way that they're treated and fed and slaughtered, all of this gets taken on by us, and it makes us very animalistic, primal, warlike in our nature, it was said. Plutarch told us that meat clogs and confuses the mind and makes man weak and feeble. And so let's look to Jesus. What did Jesus say? Now, before I start with this, I know that anytime someone brings up any one particular figure or one religion, it tends to divide people rather than bring them together, unfortunately. But hear me out, because I want to go into a bit of background here so I can try to do this in a very non-divisive way. At least that's my hope. So bear with me. But at the core of each seemingly opposing religion exists this single timeless spiritual teaching, this golden thread that passes through every tradition. And for many thousands of years, true spiritual illumination, true experiential understanding was beyond the grasp of the common person. And I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, but this is just the reality of things with where we're at, our current state of consciousness. But essentially what we've been given is religion in its current form, where we are taught the bang for your buck sort of teachings, if you will. These are things like forgiveness and humility, self-control, service to others, the things that will really move the needle for human progress. And the secret teachings, the esoteric knowledge, these things are encoded and passed down in the form of story, parable, myth, but the true teachings are only known to the inner initiates and very secluded communities of people who are tasked with preserving this knowledge for a day when humanity would be ready to receive it again. And lucky for us, we are now entering that time. But we know very little about these groups because they made it such a point not to draw attention to themselves. And so for every religion, there is also a mystical sect who possesses that culture's pure, unadulterated spiritual knowledge. And this knowledge, it passed through ancient Egypt, through the mystery schools of ancient Greece. It was reserved for the few and not the many. In the Celtic cultures, the inner initiates were known as the Druids. In Persia, they were the Magi or the magicians. In Islam, it's the Sufis. In Christianity, it's the Gnostics. In medieval times, these individuals were known as the mysterious alchemists. And so these are the groups and the individuals who are labeled heretics and exterminated through witch hunts, inquisitions, crusades, because this knowledge threatens the reign and the power of existing religious and political authorities. Now, Jesus, of course, was a Jew, and in the days of Jesus, there were three main sects of Judaism. There were the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were the very legalistic religious adherents who put on the outer appearance that they were following the law, but who Jesus criticized and condemned as being frauds, hypocrites. So Jesus definitely was not a Pharisee or a Sadducee, but there was also a lesser known third group, a small community of people who lived in the cave dwellings in the Qumran desert, and these people were known as the Essenes. The historians of the time say were some of the greatest people to ever live. They were the mystical, spiritual Jews who held much of the true knowledge. And so while the Pharisees and the Sadducees said that the way to God is by following the law, the Essenes understood that the law is like a set of training wheels. It's an entryway that points to a deeper existential truth, and that if you live by the law of love, there's no need for following an outer set of written rules. So these were the Essenes, and we know that Jesus in the New Testament was referred to as Jesus the Nazarene. And the traditional view tells us that it's because he was born in a town called Nazareth. The only problem is there are many historians today who now believe the town of Nazareth did not exist until several decades after the birth of Christ. So what could be the real meaning of the Nazarene? Well, at that time, there were two main groups of Essenes, and one of them was from an area called Nazar. They were referred to as Nazar Essenes, or what was usually shortened to the Nazarenes. So it seems that there is a high likelihood that Jesus was actually born into a Nazarene lineage, and likely John the Baptist as well. And I know this could be a tough one to swallow, especially if you're raised in more traditional Christian beliefs like I was brought up in the Christian church. I went to Catholic high school, and I remember when I first started learning about this stuff, I was afraid to even talk about it with the people I knew. You know, I don't want to go to hell. I don't want my Christian friends to excommunicate me from the friend group. And so it could be a difficult leap to take. But there is actually evidence in the Bible that helps support this as well. For example, things like water baptism, communion, healing by laying on of hands, or fasting for extended periods in the desert. These are all things that we do not find in the Old Testament, and suddenly they appear in the New Testament with Jesus. But we also know from Jewish historians at the time, Flavius, Josephus, that these were all Essene initiation practices or initiation rituals. And in fact, before the Romans came up with the name Christian, the followers of Jesus were actually referred to as Nazarenes. In Acts chapter 24, when Paul is being tried, he's accused of being a plague, one who stirs up riots among all Jews throughout the world, and is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. To which Paul responds, "This I confess, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I do worship the God of our fathers." So he basically affirms this, and he says, I am a follower of the way. And the way is another name for this single great spiritual teaching that we can trace through every religious culture, all the way back through Egypt, and even more ancient, highly advanced civilizations that existed in humanity's deep past. Talk about things like Atlantis, Lemuria, things like that. And so at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, well, what does this have anything to do with what we're talking about, with diet? And well, much of this pure spiritual knowledge was preserved through written texts and traditions that have either been A, lost to time, or B, deliberately suppressed and withheld by dominating religious authorities who are trying to maintain power. And this includes many gospel accounts of Jesus' life and his teachings that were omitted from the canonical Bible. And there were two major discoveries in the 40s and the 50s that would forever change what we know about the Jewish and the Christian religions. One of these is called the Nag Hammadi Library, and this was a collection of early Christian texts, Gnostic texts, that were not included in the Bible. The second was the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are believed to be the Essene library of early Jewish mystical texts. And these texts are much more spiritual, they're much more metaphysical in nature than the cut and dry religious messaging that we're so familiar with. Now, one of these texts, and this one was actually found earlier than the other ones, it was found in the secret archives of the Vatican, and it's called the Essene Gospel of Peace. And to make it brief, this is where we hear essentially the story of like holistic health Jesus. And of course, there are naysayers. There are people who will tell you that these texts are fabricated, of course. So I would absolutely encourage you to do your own research with this. Don't believe me and take my word at face value. This might not resonate with you, and that's totally fine. You can take what sticks and leave behind what doesn't. But nevertheless, this particular section on health really resonated strongly with me. In this text, Jesus goes around and he basically teaches people how to eat organic foods. He tells them to only eat locally sourced foods, because food, we now know, carries information about our environment. It carries life force. He teaches people about moderation, about not mixing too many foods. He talks about healing through grounding. He teaches people how to do enemas in the river. He teaches people how to cast out demons using fasting. And demons, the way I understand them, are just personifications of our own making. They're negative energies that we personify, and we create this outer projection of our own fear that represents these negative, denser energies. And so when we fast, we know that the body starts to raise its vibration to take in energy from things like sunlight, from breath, from grounding. And so when we raise our vibration, there is no longer an anchor point within us of fear. So these negative energies, these demons that we call them, can no longer latch on. So Jesus basically explains to people that when they're eating unnatural foods or thinking negative thoughts, judging their neighbor, acting from a place of sin consciousness, that when you do this, you accumulate all this negative energy and sin in your body that manifests as pain and suffering and disease. And so this is what Jesus tells us in particular about food. He says, "Kill neither men nor beasts, nor yet the food which goes into your mouth. For if you eat living food, the same will quicken you. But if you kill your food, the dead food will kill you also. For life comes only from life, and from death comes always death. For everything which kills your foods kills your bodies also. And everything which kills your bodies kills your souls also. Your bodies become what your foods are, even as your spirits likewise become what your thoughts are." And so the diet he proposes is basically a lacto-vegetarian diet. Fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, herbs, raw dairy, raw honey. He also teaches people how to make raw bread by putting grains in the sun. But keep in mind, this was also a time when we didn't have pesticides doused crops or compromised mucus linings in our guts. So humans digested grains in basically a completely different way than we do now. But these are the words of Jesus. He says, "So eat always from the table of God, the fruits of the trees, the grain and the grasses of the field, the milk of the beasts and the honey of the bees. For all these are fed and ripened by the fire of life." And the fire of life, he contrasts to the fire of death. The fire of death is the fire that we use to cook our food. The fire of life is the inner fire that lights up our body, the sort of life force. And so the most important part of the food, he's saying, is the life force energy, the biophotons that get stored up as energy from the sun. Because we are light beings, sun beings, and I think it's no coincidence that every ancient culture worshipped the sun. And so we can talk about the nutrients and the vitamins and the minerals, or maybe the deficiencies that we might accumulate with a plant-based diet. But really, all these nutrients and vitamins and minerals are really just different ways of transmitting energy and information. If you're familiar with the work of people like Walter Russell, you'll be familiar with this concept that what appears to be separate elements and minerals and chemicals are really just seemingly different manifestations of the same interconnected energy. And so there may be some people who don't agree necessarily with the raw milk or the raw honey because these are animal products. I know that I've probably already offended the religious folks, and so hopefully I'm not offending the raw vegan crowd as well. But I used to be very opposed to milk as well, and I did a lot of conventional dairy growing up, and it caused me a lot of problems. It caused a lot of inflammation, digestion problems. But we're talking about local, raw, unpasteurized milk here. No processing, no hormones, no antibiotics, none of that. And so if you're getting the highest quality, and you think about it, milk is really just this compacted, refined plant matter that's been processed through the digestive tract of an animal, because all cows eat is grass. And I think this is what Jesus is really getting at here, is that as he would say, it's made of the fire of life, that raw milk is still alive. It has life force energy and living enzymes that are really important to the body. And so this is something that I've personally been experimenting with lately to see how I feel, especially in phases of heavier training with raw dairy. And so far, I feel very, very good when I include a little bit of raw milk to cap off the day. And I've noticed that I actually don't get any of the cravings that I used to get. So that's very interesting that it's providing some of the trace minerals and the nutrients that were leading to my cravings earlier on. And so this has been an interesting experience for me. And just to touch on another point, yes, the Bible does mention Jesus eating fish and feeding people with fish and bread, which is interesting because in many other gospel accounts that the Catholic Church did not include in the Bible, Jesus is seen strictly condemning the consumption and the killing of animals. But let's say he did eat fish, and even though this isn't vegetarian, I think most of us can agree that vibrationally and karmically speaking as well, this is the least damaging food if you're going to eat meat. And in these cases, of course, Jesus always prayed and he gave thanks over the meal, which raises the vibration of the food that we're eating and the energy in the room. In the Essene gospel, Jesus says you should breathe long and deeply at all your meals so that the angel of air may bless your food and chew your food well until it basically becomes water so it can be turned into blood in your body. He tells us to eat slowly as if it was a prayer that you're making to God. And so prayer, intention, the emotional state in which we eat, eating with gratitude and in the company of good people, and not in a state of stress and worry. These are all important but overlooked aspects of diet that could be just as important as the physical food itself. And what and how we eat really determines how we think and how we feel, and in turn, what kind of energy that we could put out into the world. And so all labels and food dogmas aside, imagine a world where we returned to this and lived in this way. Even just the small, simple changes in returning back to basics, where we eat local, organic fruits and vegetables and herbs, where we live in harmony with the animals. Maybe we consume some local raw dairy, and for the people who want to eat meat, consume sustainable wild-caught fish, sourcing everything from regenerative agricultural systems and nutrient-rich soils. How much better off would our world be right now? How much happier would we feel? How much energy would we have to pour into our work and our families and creating a vision for a better future? How connected would we feel to the land and the people all around us, to know ourselves again as these infinite spiritual beings and this interconnected species, rather than these separate entities who are fighting one another for control and survival constantly. So maybe you're on board with this, maybe you're not sold. Either way though, I would love to hear your thoughts and your personal experience with this down in the comments. I love discussing this topic, maybe you can tell, and I love learning things that I didn't know before. And like I said, I would highly encourage you to pursue your own research and read some of these texts for yourself. They're absolutely fascinating, and they're not that long either. But wherever you stand, I say just take what works for you right now and go with it, and keep asking questions, keep being curious. It's seeming more and more that many of these great high cultures and these humans, the great humans to ever walk the planet, they all arrived at many of these same conclusions. And is it an accident that this knowledge has been deliberately hidden from us for millennia? Is it a coincidence that as a result, when we look around at our world, we're more unhealthy, more unhappy, more spiritually deprived, and more dependent on the system than ever before? These are all questions that I believe are important and worth asking, especially if we want to arrive at a future that Jesus has always told us is possible. And I believe this is the future that he truly came to usher in, and where his words from the Essene gospel will ring true for all humanity. And it says that we will see not diseases anymore upon the earth, and we will live forever in the kingdom of the heavens. And so, as always, I want to thank you for joining me. If you've enjoyed this, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new. If you're looking for some further resources and content, I'll put the links in the description down below. You can download a copy of my raw diet ebook completely free. And if you want a more structured program to help you transition to a fully raw diet in just 30 days, I'd like to invite you to join us in the 30-day raw food challenge. I'll share everything I've learned in my journey through my successes and my failures. So if you're interested, certainly hope you'll check that out. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and I will see you next time.